And we are back with you on the CNC Auto Show. And we are answering automotive questions, but we're also talking about sounds and smells that your car may be making that you may want to know what it is.
Yep, might be trying to tell you something.
Exactly, and telling what it is may save you some time and money. One very common item, I would say, that falls under both categories, probably a little bit more toward the sound thing, is things to do with your brakes.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah.
And, of course, one common sound has to do with squealing noise.
Yeah.
John
It's normally
Ryan,
the beginning of it, isn't it?
mention what they started putting on brake pads that have saved people a huge amount of money on having to buy rotors.
So brake pads now have, well, I say now, probably within the last 15 years or so?
Yeah, something like that.
They actually have a brake squealer installed on them, and it's a little piece of metal that actually contacts the trailing edge of the brake pads. And what it does is it actually, when you squeeze the brakes, it will actually contact the rotor and just barely drag just enough to, well, sorry, I said that wrong. Not when it's stopping, but as it's rolling, if the brake pads are thin enough, the squealer will be contacting the rotor, and it'll cause a squeal, almost a constant squeal, to let the driver know that, of course, the brakes are needing replaced. But the confusing part is when the brakes are applied, a lot of times the squeal will go away, and that's because that squealer is making more contact with it in the brake pads, and sometimes it can even flex enough to come off the rotor a little bit. So that can be a little bit confusing, but typically if you hear squealing without touching the brakes and you're just rolling down the road, that's an indication that they're bad.
And I've had it both ways. I've had it to where it would make the high-pitched squealing noise just as you're rolling down the road, and then you barely touch the brakes and the noise go away.
Right.
And I've had cases to where it would make the noise only when you apply the brake. I feel like it depends on how far it's worn.
Yeah.
A lot
but
of
I've
other
also
factors.
had people bend those out of the way and keep going.
Yeah.
So.
and then they definitely do need rotors eventually.
Typically after that, if you just ride and just ignore that message, so to speak, the pads, the stopping material will wear off to the point to where it's the backing plate contacting the rotor, and of course it would do damage to the rotor and need to be replaced at that point.
Exactly. And another noise that I have that we deal with has to do with squealing brakes. Especially when the brakes get a little bit warm and you apply the brakes and they will squeal a lot of times. That don't necessarily mean that your brakes are worn out, but it could be a sign that the brakes are glazed over.
They're glazed over, or maybe even possibly installed, not necessarily incorrectly, but not followed all the steps, the procedure as far as lubricating all the moving parts.
Or not a good quality pad.
Or not machining the rotors. I mean, the list goes on and on.
We switched over to the ADO pads from Napa a good many years back, and they have just been fantastic to go with. You ready to take a call?
Yeah, let's go over to Rick.
All right. Hello, Rick.
Morning, guys.
Welcome to the CNC Auto Show, and what can we help you with this morning?
Yes, sir. I was wondering, I've got a 2016 Honda Odyssey that we've actually already put a lot of miles on, but went into the dealer the other day at $32,000. They're wanting me to do a bunch of services to it, including cabin air filter, some of the other things that go along with the B1 service. I'm just wondering, is that service really necessary every 30,000 miles, or can you wait till the 60,000 interval? Because we're not getting any smells in the cabin filter, and everything's chugging along good. Most of those miles are highway miles. We were commuting quite a bit from Columbia until we moved back to Augusta, so I'm just wondering, are those 30,000-mile services extremely important, or can you stretch it to the 60,000 and do it all then?
Yeah, Rick, I think that's a great question. As far as your cabin air filter, of course, you could always check it and see the condition of it if you removed it and it did look clean. It's just like your house filter. Of course, if it still looked clean after a month, you probably wouldn't replace it. So you may be able to stretch that to 60,000 miles. And it also depends on where you park your car and the kind of the elements the car is in. A lot of times we see vehicles that are parked under a pine tree, and you could replace those every other time you drive it. So that may or may not be dirty. What other services did they say was recommended?
I believe they're saying a transmission flush and maybe even a coolant flush, what they call the B1 service, which is the light that comes on automatically. But it's the last Odyssey that I had, we traded it for $400,000, but I waited until the 60,000 mile marker to do it.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of that has to do with the driving conditions that somebody wants. It is very, very possible to extend some mileage ranges that you deal with as far as certain services. What we normally do is just do the inspection side of it. And we'll let it, for instance, let you know if the cabin air is definitely needed right then, or if it's something you could wait for another year on.
And that's kind of the same thing with the transmission fluid too, because based on the condition of the transmission fluid, again, you said most of it was highway miles, so it's not the typical stop and go kind of wear and tear on a transmission. So having that fluid inspected to the point to see if it's dirty or if it's clean, that would definitely let you know.
And they did not do a bad thing mentioning these items to you, because now you're aware of them, that it's coming due.
Right.
But for instance, the transmission flush, if the transmission fluid is still clean, has a good red color to it,
red tint, yeah,
and not discolored in any way, you would be absolutely fine to extend that a little bit. On the coolant, waiting another.
Same thing. I mean, you want to check the protection level, the condition of it, of course, the level. So 30,000 miles is kind of in my opinion, more of an inspection versus, an absolute must-do service.
But let's say that if you had a vehicle that you were driving under really dusty conditions and you were driving it kind of fairly hard, especially pulling a boat or a trailer or something like that, and you were in mountainous area,
I'd automatically say yes.
High probability you would be due for a trans service, you would be due for a cabin air filter, and all of these things would be needed.
Right.
But really the inspection is what would tell you more. So there's a lot of gray area in that on extending it. Now, going ahead and doing it at 30,000 miles more than likely wouldn't be a bad thing at all.
Right.
But extending it would more than likely be absolutely fine, too, if it's inspected and made sure that there's no discoloration on the fluid and that the cabin air filter is not stopped up or anything along those lines.
And I guess in short, it really depends on your budget. If you can afford it, do it. If you can't, stretch it out a little bit.
Yeah, you can wait. I mean, and how many miles did you get on your other one, Rick?
We had almost 80,000 on it when we traded it. And the only reason we traded it wasn't anything wrong with the vehicle, just that when we bought that vehicle 2.5 years prior, we really didn't buy the options that we wanted. So I actually took it in for the 75,000 mile service. And while it was being serviced, I actually walked around and picked out another vehicle and just let them keep it and hold the bill. So
all right,
it actually worked out better for us to do it at that time. Can I tell y'all a quick story I had about?
Yeah, Rick. Do you mind if we put you on hold through the break?
Sure.
All right, we'll be right back.
We'll be right back, Rick. We'll be back with more of the CNC Auto Show.